Chapter 6, American Pageant, AP United States History, Notre Dame High School. This is Mr. Shea. Chapter 6 starts out with the French, and your book describes them being late to the party in North America, and they were somewhat late and very different in the way they settled in the New World. Just like England before them and Spain before them, they really had to get their issues at home solved before they could look to new areas to colonize. And the main focus in getting their issues at home solved was really the conflicts between the Catholics and the Protestant Huguenots. Once this is settled, and you can see there that it wasn't easy to be settled, St. Bartholomew's Day, 10,000 Huguenots were murdered in cold blood. But once it's settled in 1598 with the Edict of Nantes, which allowed for or eliminated religious persecution and it ended religious wars, along with the leadership of King Louis, who would be there for 72 years. Now France was in a position to look towards expansion and look towards the New World. So how do they do it? They go about it a little bit differently. Quebec becomes the first important colony in North America. Samuel de Champlain, father of New France, is the establisher. Very quickly, he establishes relationships with the Huron. Now, the problem with the established relationship with the Huron is they are enemies with the Iroquois, and so that will haunt future French settlers for years to come as the Iroquois Confederacy grows very powerful. So, what was it like in Quebec and then other establishments in the New World? Completely different from the experience of the English. Self government was not present, it was completely autocratic, which means uh, just supreme rule by very few. There is no trial by jury, there's no colonial legislature. Uh, Very, very different experience, and no room there for any idea or interpretation of an independent spirit forming. Why didn't the French population grow as rapidly as it did in the English colonies, who were doubling every 25 years? Mainly because of economics. The idea that leaving France was not as much of a necessity for many there because their economy was a little bit more successful. There was plenty of room. Overpopulation wasn't an issue. Also, what they did in the New World, which was primarily fur trading, establishing forts in different areas, and the people who came over here were just interested, for the most part, in doing that and then going home. So there wasn't much motivation, even if you were Huguenot, Protestant Huguenot, who you might say might want to come here and establish a new colony to escape religious persecution. They were not allowed to migrate to the New World. It was against the law. Coureurs des Bois, these are wood runners. They are the explorers. They are the fur trademen in New France. Your book describes them. They drank a lot. They caused a lot of problems, but they also were very quick in the woods, very good scavengers. Sometimes they would establish good relationships with Native Americans, other times bad relationships with Native Americans, and they would fight them. But they were extremely important to the settling of New France. To that end, Native Americans become partners in the fur trade. Uh, the beaver becomes an overhunted animal in the New World, almost to the point of extinction in several areas. Along with all other areas in the New World, Indians are decimated by disease uh, and the introduction of alcohol as well. Some missionaries, Catholic missionaries, Jesuits, did try to convert Native Americans. They did try to save Native Americans, even from their own countrymen and the French, but they were fairly unsuccessful in doing so. What they were very successful in doing was exploration. Some famous French explorers, Anton Cadillac founded Detroit, Cadillac name. Robert de La Salle, who floats down the Mississippi and then founds Louisiana, named after King Louis. Of course, this is extremely important when you think about the Mississippi River, and all of a sudden, an easier way to bring goods, and especially fur, through the river out the Gulf of Mexico, around Florida, and back home to Europe. So it was extremely important establishment. I'm gonna show you in a second here all the different posts established here in North America for fur trading. But again, the one of the most important ones is New Orleans because that's where we lead into the Gulf of Mexico. And France had arrangements with Spanish to allow freedom of those waterways to move goods around the coast of Florida and back to Europe. And this just shows you and gives you some idea of the settlement 1608 Quebec, 1642. And then you can see the vast amount of land that the French had claimed in North America. I mean, it was very expansive, but again, not nearly the same population that is here in the British colonies. Even though there's a vast land that's claimed, primary population centers are located right here, and these would be primarily just fur trading forts along the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. Sorry, backwards there. This shows the mingling of cultures between the Native Americans and the French. Um, just some more modern technologies, the ships on the side, that they were really intertwined now in the Ohio River Valley. This chart shows the vast establishment of forts in North America. You'll notice that almost all of them, actually all of them, for the most, yeah, all of them were set up along rivers. You had to be. That way, the traders, the fur hunters, all right, our wood runners would hunt for beaver or anything else, and then they're going to bring it to these forts, and then these forts, from these forts, they're going to ship these goods along waterways, whether it be down through the Gulf and around back to Europe, or up the St. Lawrence River, past Nova Scotia, and out that way to Europe. But these were the primary means of trapping and shipping, and the source of New France's economy. So as always, England and France are going to fight each other in the New World. They're going to have a much larger war soon, but the earlier smaller wars that do take place, the first one is King William's War, and the next one is Queen Anne's War, and this is fought primarily just amongst those French coureurs de bois, which are your wood runners, and British colonists, and the Native Americans who fought alongside the French do go ahead and use their tomahawks and scalping parties, and especially bloody in Schenectady and Deerfield, Massachusetts. Schenectady is in New York and Deerfield, Mass. But eventually the British prevailed, and even though Spain had allied itself with France, they still weren't strong enough because they didn't really commit any real forces there. And they signed a peace treaty in 1713, and all of a sudden, Britain is awarded French-populated Acadia, which I'll show you on the map in a second, and Nova Scotia, which is and Hudson Bay, which is even more significant. So you're going to see how much the map has changed as a result of these smaller wars. So what else is going on? Well, we know that the American colonies, in solitary neglect and the roots for independence, and the British were also beginning, to work with the Spanish on some trading rights, and so remember the Spanish control still most of South America, and so to trade and get goods away, there had to be deals made. And at one point, though, Robert Jenkins, who was a smuggler, has an ear sliced off by a Spanish sword, and then so a war breaks out as a result in 1739. It's called War of Jenkins' Ear, but it eventually just becomes known as King George's War. And in King George's War, It's a little bit of a larger scale conflict. The New Englanders, with the help of British Navy, were able to capture the French fortress of Louisbourg. They were upset, however, after the war and the treaty that was signed in 1748 that France was allowed or given back Louisbourg, and the New Englanders really resented that of the British government. They thought that they had fought hard and it was now going to be a fort that was still a threat to them, and it was really politics in Great Britain, the old world, that had cost them this opportunity to be worry free of the French. Some of the attacks, and you see Schenectady and Deerfield, Mass. here. Okay. Just show you now. This is how much the map had changed now as a result of these three conflicts. British still hold their 13 colonies here, but now also uh, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and then here in Hudson Bay. So the French have all of a sudden been surrounded in their claims on both sides, and the St. Lawrence River was really, and the Mississippi River are now their only strongholds, but it's reduced significantly in a short amount of time. So now the contention becomes this area right here, the Ohio River Valley, where the British, who have this enormous growing population, want to push further west into this area. The French want to defend it at all costs because it's a very profitable trade, and it's only a matter of time before there's a fighting breaks out for this area. So how does this all break out? And George Washington is involved here, and his family was a very wealthy family, is granted land rights in the Ohio River Valley, which, the legality of it is questionable. How they would claim this land that was and where it was. But Washington is sent with and commissioned a colonel and sent with some British soldiers into this area to see what's going on, to see and make claims. During his trip, he encounters a small detachment of French troops. He is successful in not only defeating this, they're the first ones to fire, the Virginians were the first one to fire. The French leader's killed, and Washington celebrates and is happy that they were successful in this conflict, which was really just a skirmish. But then the French return with reinforcements. Washington is forced to surrender. In 1704, he has to surrender after a 10-hour siege. But this is the beginning of the French and Indian War. Right around this time, or right after it, 1755, the French Acadians, who are, we look at that old area that we just showed that were conquered by the British up near Nova Scotia, are forced to leave that area because the British are nervous that they'll have spies or they'll be attacked from those individuals. So they're forced to go to the Louisiana area. Shows just the history of world wars, and you see the 7 Years' War now breaks out not only in the colonies. After a couple of years of fighting off and on in the colonies, the war breaks out on a massive scale, not only in Europe but in Africa and other regions where the French and the British have colonies. Other countries are involved, Germany, Russia, Spain. So it becomes a much larger conflict than just here in the colonies. This is actually showing the capture. We're going back a couple to Jenkins' War, or King George's War. This is the capture of Louisbourg. Okay, I kind of just went over what this slide is referring to, so I'm going to go ahead. You guys can take a quick look. So the British are actually the ones who get involved, along with some colonial leaders, to try to strengthen colonial ties between the colonies, the 13 colonies. They were very independent of each other. Well, at least New England was actually probably all of them were pretty independent of each other. And the British Crown knows that it's probably important to make sure that they are willing to work together as one to defend and fight this war. And oddly enough, that probably comes back to bite the British government bringing the colonies together for the first time. And they get together at the Albany Congress. Ben Franklin becomes the most outspoken delegate at this Congress. He's representing Pennsylvania. He's also agent to the Crown for Massachusetts, but he's representing Pennsylvania. Not only seven or so of the colonies actually had delegates who show up, so it wasn't extremely successful. But at this meeting, Ben Franklin not only proposes, better unity, and talks about better unity, but he also proposes an idea for a Congress, and to have this group that would unite permanently the colonies and allow for the colonial colonies to self-rule themselves together. And this was a pretty radical idea. They actually voted for it. It was agreed upon by all the delegates to that were there to move forward with the plan, but it was rejected once the vote was brought back to their individual colonies. The British also rejected the idea, thinking it was the colonists overstepping and seeking out too much independence. So Ben Franklin was very frustrated by that. He also publishes his famous cartoon, Join or Die. Sometimes it's people believe that cartoon of the snake in 13 parts was made for the Revolutionary War, but it was actually here for the French and Indian War. I'll show you that in a second. Here are some of the battle sites. The yellow ones here with the red outline represent British victories. Sorry about that, guys. And you could tell that we're going to go into this in a moment here when we start talking about William Pitt. But here is, just so you guys have an idea of map-wise where we are. Here's Washington's first exhibition. Here's Fort Necessity, which Washington had to surrender. Here is Braddock's defeat. Braddock is again going to be that older general who really doesn't understand how wars are fought especially in dense forests. So he's going to face defeat there. Here shows Quebec, extremely important. Montreal. These are the two most important battles won. Louisbourg, okay, in 758. But this is the St. Louis River, and once the British are able to take these two, it really cuts the rest of New France off from supply chains. And this just gives you an idea of how wide the fighting was during the French Indian War. Here in Spain, France, in India, here in the Philippine Islands, down here in the Caribbean, and Cuba. Much more than just a conflict in the New World. There's Ben Franklin's Join or Die. The snake separated into 13 parts. Okay, so the early parts of the war, General Braddock again symbolizes this. A much smaller force of French and Indian soldiers able to easily defeat him and instill heavy casualties during that fighting. He is killed during the battle. George Washington is there during the battle. He is nearly killed several times during it. He learns a valuable lesson fighting under Braddock. So what happens after this battle, and you look defeat after defeat for the British? Eventually, the savior is William Pitt. William Pitt is loved by the common people. The common people really love him. He's a great speaker, great orator, very witty, smart leader, and he understands how this war needs to be fought and won. He develops a new strategy aimed at Quebec and Montreal primarily because he knows that'll cut off France's stronghold in North America. He also understands leadership. He's not going to put old generals, old-time war strategies in place. He's going to use young, energetic generals who are willing to take more risk but also adapt to this new warfare being fought by the Indians especially. So Louisbourg again in 758 falls, and he starts to work his way down the St. Lawrence River from the Atlantic. Next, when this is extremely important, was Quebec, and James Wolfe, who does die in this battle, as does Montcalm, who was France's leader at Quebec. But Wolfe, his daring nighttime expedition where they scale the rock walls and put themselves in perfect position the next morning to defeat the French army. So after Quebec, then Montreal, and once Montreal falls, it's really the end of French influence in America. Besides those people left behind, and a couple other areas where the French were allowed to remain, but for the most part, France's power stronghold in the New World is completely eliminated after the fall of Montreal and the peace treaty of Paris in 1763. Of course, we know there'll be another peace treaty of Paris in 1783, but that's going to be an entirely different for an entirely different reason. France also gave to Spain, ceded to Spain its Mississippi claims and especially Louisiana and Florida, which we'll see in a second here on the map. This is Wolfe's conquering of Quebec. See the men scaling the rock wall. And after the war, now, what were some of the consequences of the war? Well, for one, the colonists themselves had a lot more confidence in their ability to wage war in their colonial militias. From their point of view, they had done a great job. They also saw, and although they weren't thinking of fighting the British at this point, but they saw that the British military was not invincible. They saw Braddock's fall. They saw the trouble that the Indians caused the British regulars. They also developed contempt for the professional soldiers. The British, again, would not recognize any American military commission above the rank of captain. This is disheartening to them. They're supposed to be their countrymen, their equals, and they're being treated as if they were a foreign people who were conquered and then colonized. But they weren't. They, they're they never thought of themselves that way. They always saw themselves as equals. So this was very alarming to the colonists, and it certainly left a bad taste in their mouth. From the British point of view, they saw colonists who some were reluctant to fight if they weren't close to the battle. Um, some didn't. Some colonies wouldn't provide as much money or as many troops. They saw smuggling that occurred even to the opposing sides by some British colonists, and so they also had resentment built up. So they emerged from this war. What emerged from this war is a very American identity for the colonists and the British. Not only for the colonists, but also for the British, looking at these Americans as being different than them or lower than them. Some of the positives that come out of this for the colonists, um, their soldiers, or at least their officers, like Washington, received a great amount of experience. Again, they come out of it with a sense of unity, the ability to unite as colonies, through the Albany Congress and then even throughout the war, and they really do develop a sense of togetherness that wasn't present prior to the French Indian War. They were very separate colonies. Now that there was at least a sense of more colonial unity. And now here's, this shows the map again. This is prior to the French and Indian War, and you can see here again the British here and here, and then the French through and the Spanish, but then after, a very different look. A very different look. All British and then Spanish. So skip through this, except okay. Um, let's just talk about. There we go. Pontiac's uprising. So now with the French gone and the British really excited to, at least the colonists really excited to move west the Appalachians into the Ohio River Valley, Ottawa Chief Pontiac sees this and he knows it's a threat. So he unites several of the tribes together and conducts these raids where 2,000 soldiers and settlers were killed. The British are not, at least the British government, are not really in the mood to deal with future uprisings like Pontiac's uprising. As a result, at least at that point, because of the expense of the French Indian War that had just concluded, they decide to issue the Proclamation of 1763, which for them probably was a temporary proclamation, but to the colonists it was insulting. Didn't make any sense. And the proclamation did not allow for any settlement west of this line. And the colonists are saying, well, why did we fight the war? We fought the war for this area. We want to move here. There's great opportunity. And here's the British Crown saying no. And so the French Indian War absolutely is the foundation or the first cause of the Revolutionary War. And it has so many ways the building blocks of revolution, from the development of American identity, seeing the lack of invincibility of the British Crown, foreshadowing the shift from salutary neglect to stricter controls, which the first one is the Proclamation of 1763, colonial self-government, the Albany Congress. So the French Indian War, to sum up, would be the beginning of the Revolutionary Era. Okay, that's it. Good luck, guys.